Vibrational frequencies don't carve up cattle. They don't cause odors. That's a nice theory, but it doesn't explain what happened at the ranch. Not even close. It was one of the most dramatic of all the mutilation cases that NIDS ever investigated. It was 10 o'clock on a morning of the rancher and his wife were out tagging the ears of newborn calves. They were maybe 50 yards from their ranch house. I mean, it's flat ground. And they tag the ear of this calf. They go another 100 yards or so. They hear this noise. The dog makes a noise looking back in the direction where this calf has been tagged. They see the mother cow sort of dragging its leg, walking around in a circle. They go running back there, and this calf has been completely stripped of flesh. I mean, all basically that was left was bones and eyes in broad daylight, right there in the clear sight of where they were. No cell, no tracks, no anything.
Hollow Voices, Episode 2. Field Notes. Later, in some refrigerated federal borough built by people who confused clipboards with civilization, they would file it as Incident H4, Rural Containment Event, Wyoming Sector, complete with annexes, photographs, witness statements, thermal images, chain of custody forms, and enough stapled paper to convince a weak republic that reality can be flattened if you press hard enough. The report would mention caliber, weather, time of death, estimated mass, and the names of personnel lost in the containment breach. It would not mention that the cattle never crossed that patch of pasture again. It would not mention that Calder Wynn removed every mirror from his house as if glass itself had become a snitch. It would not mention that for the rest of that winter, men working late at the quarry heard voices in the ventilation system rehearsing their names in tones that got warmer and more accurate over time. It would say only that Calder Wynn was the one that shot it. The government loves a clean sentence when the truth looks deranged. The morning broke mean. Not dramatic, not poetic, mean. The whole ranch had the hard metallic shine of something left overnight in a morgue drawer. Frost glazed the dead grass and a brittle white skin. Fence posts wore little collars of rime. The creek along the far fence moved under ice with the sound of somebody whispering through clenched teeth. Even the crows looked offended to be alive, hopping around a ruined hay bale like undertakers late to a funeral they hoped would get rained out. Calder stood on the porch with a mug of coffee black enough to qualify as a religion and watched his cattle face the tree line. They were bunched by the creek, shoulder to shoulder, every one of them aimed towards the timber, with the fixed concentration of people waiting outside a hospital room for a doctor they already do not trust. A wind came off the ridge. Their hides twitched. None of them turned. One lowed once, short and flat, and then thought better of it. Something in the trees had already won an argument. Calder knew the ordinary appetites of ranch life. Rust, debt, drought, snow load, coyotes, bad wire, worse neighbors, county men in polished boots who came smiling and left with a little more of your time every time. He knew all the common predators, including the two-legged kind. This was not that. An ordinary man might have called the sheriff. Calder went for the rifle. It was an old Marlin 30-30. Walnut stock gone dark from the weather, oil, and the hands of men who had trusted it more than they trusted the century. His father had carried it back when people still believed history moved in sensible decades, instead of convulsing from one lunatic episode to the next. Calder checked the chamber from habit rather than optimism. 6 rounds. Either an embarrassing abundance or nowhere near enough. It depended on what exactly God had permitted into the bush. He stepped off the porch and started across the pasture with the rolling, deliberate gait of a man whose knees had negotiated separate treaties with age and cold. Frost cracked under his boots. His breath went out in pale ribbons and vanished. The cattle watched him go and did not follow, which told him more than any sermon ever had. Something had been taking lambs off the neighboring place and calves from his own herd. The kills had the look of work done by a drunk butcher during an electrical storm. No clean throat bites, no drag marks worth believing. Blood in the snow, churned teeth, hoof prints, ending in the middle of nowhere like the ground itself had changed its mind. Coyotes, the town said. Coyotes and meth heads. America always prefers narcotics to the supernatural. Drugs feel more respectable. A demon is an indictment. A tweaker is a statistic. Calder had sat in the stand 3 mornings running, seeing nothing but frost and crows and the slow rot of his own patience. On the 4th morning, it finally walked out. It came between 2 cottonwoods like an idea the planet itself regretted. Tall, not grotesquely tall, just a little too tall, which is worse. Tall enough for the eye to notice and the brain to lie about for several seconds. Bare as skinned meat. Its skin had the pale yellow cast of candle wax left too long in a hot window. No hair, no clothes. The bones stood under it in the wrong places, like a body assembled from memory by a drunk carpenter. Its arms hung loose and overlong, one lower than the other, as though it had spent some previous age going on all 4s and still resented the conversation. Its feet were another offense. Broad in the heel, narrow in the forefoot, almost human if your education in anatomy came from cave drawings and panic. Wherever it stepped, the frost did not melt. It only dulled. The way a witness goes flat when asked the exact right question. It walked into the open and stopped. At a distance, it could almost have passed for a naked man having the worst morning in Wyoming. But Calder had seen drunks, runaways, cultists, lunatics, broken men, and one county assessor who looked permanently half-born. This was not any species of human trouble he recognized. The stance was what did it. Its back was to him, head tilted slightly, listening down into the frozen ground. Hands open at its sides, calm, certain, waiting in the loose, patient posture of something already familiar with violence. His son used to stand that way when he saw a buck come up from the creek bottom. That thought came through Calder like a blade. The boy had been in the ground 2 winters now under a stone that cost too much and said almost nothing. Since the funeral, Calder had developed a private theology. Anything that borrowed the dead without permission forfeited its right to keep breathing. He raised the marlin. The sight settled on the pale back. His hands shook once and then remembered themselves. The cattle were distant shapes by the fence, steaming in the cold. The creature made no visible breath. He did not call out. Only amateurs waste words on things that come out of the trees wearing the shape of a problem. He breathed once, let half of it go, held the rest like a gambler palming his last good chip. Then it turned its head. Slowly. Not with any natural swivel. With the deliberate caution of something following instructions in a language it did not fully understand. The vertebrae rolled under the skin like marbles in a sock. It looked up towards the stand. and while it turned, it changed. The back of the skull drew tighter, the cheekbones climbed, the mouth adjusted itself with hideous patience, like a man trying on dentures in a mirror after a bar fight. It was not a trick of light, not a sudden glamour, a process, a revolting effort. A thing learning how a face should sit. The face it found was Calder's. Not exact, close in the way a caricature is close. The eyes sat a fraction too far apart, the nose bent the wrong way. Calder's had broken right after a grain elevator fight 30 years before. This one kinked left, as if the copyist had read the notes upside down. The mouth ran too wide at the corners, too ambitious, like whoever built it did not know where a man's face was supposed to stop. Under the chin lay a faint pale seam ear to ear. The kind of line you get when the lid does not quite fit the jar. It smiled. Calder shot it in the mouth. The rifle cracked across the pasture and drove back into his shoulder with the old familiar honesty of a tool that has never once pretended to be your friend. A burst of black mist blew out behind the thing's head and hung in the air for a second, like spilled ink before drifting among the pines. The body dropped straight down. No stagger, no shriek, no campfire demon nonsense, just down, all at once, as if some invisible accountant had closed the file. The echo ran down the draw, struck the far hill, came limping back, and died. After that, the pasture sounded almost normal. Which in America is how the ugliest things often proceed. He worked the lever. Hot brass spun past his cheek and vanished into the frost. He kept the sights on the body through a long count, then climbed from the stand and walked in. Up close, the creature was worse in all the practical ways that make horror hard to romanticize. The shot had torn away most of the lower jaw. Inside was not bone, not anything that deserved the courtesy of a word. White, rich cartilage, rubbery and badly organized, as if somebody had tried to manufacture a skull out of boiled fat and bad intent. Small gray stones sat in it where teeth should have been. Behind that, deep in the throat, something pale and coiled, twitched once like a startled worm in a flashlight beam. The eyes were intact. His eyes. Same muddy brown. Same tiny pale fleck in the left iris where a rock had tagged him at 12. They looked up at him, without blinking, without clouding, without any sign of surrender. A dead thing looking at you through your own eyes can ruin a man's appetite for metaphor. He put the second round through the right eye on principle. The head kicked sideways. After that, it looked less like a question and more like meat, and meat is manageable. He nudged the shoulder with his boot. It gave in a strange way. Not dead weight, not human slackness. There was a spring in it. A hidden pressure, as if something beneath the skin was still disputing the verdict. Calder spat into the frost. Not a damn cat, he said. He had heard all his life that curiosity killed the cat. He had also heard about trickle-down economics, moral progress, the dignity of bureaucracy, and several different wars that were supposed to make the world safer. Civilization runs on fables. Whatever this thing was, it would not get the benefit of his curiosity. He had already given enough of himself to ugly mysteries. Then the corpse's left hand twitched. Not much. Just enough to make him step back and put the barrel on it. The fingers spread slowly in the dead grass like somebody waking up under a pile of coats. The palm turned upward. The tendons stood under the pale skin. For one impossible second, it looked as though the thing might be reaching toward him not in attack, but in appeal, which somehow made it worse. Then the hand settled. Calder kept the sights on it for another 10 seconds. "Try it," he said. "See how the rest of your day goes." Nothing did. But from the tree line deep in the timber, something answered with 3 soft knocks. Wood on wood, deliberate, patient. He turned the rifle towards the sound. Saw nothing. He looked back. The corpse had not moved, which proved nothing. Sheriff Earl Wright arrived in a county truck faded to the color of old despair. He came up the ranch road at the speed of a man who did not want to be late, but did not want to be early enough to witness too much. Earl was built out of caffeine, ulcers, and compromise. He got out, hitched his gun belt, pulled his hat down against the wind, walked 3 steps towards the body, and stopped like he had reached an invisible fence. "Jesus Christ, Calder," he said. "What the hell did you shoot?" "Something I don't have a tag for." The sheriff circled the corpse without letting his boots cross its shadow. Country people keep superstitions in the same drawer where they store weather sense and grudges. He bent a little, then chose self-preservation over curiosity. "Looks like a man." "No man I know goes naked in January unless meth or religion is involved," Calder said. "Look at the hands." Earl looked. The fingers were too long by a joint. The nails were black, flat, and thick. The ridges on the fingertips did not spiral or loop. They ran in concentric bands like cut wood or growth rings. The soles of the feet carried a pattern somewhere between bark and tire tread. "You sure this ain't some goddamn art thing?" Earl said. That was the modern American answer to evidence of the impossible. If it disgusts you enough, maybe an art student did it. Calder jerked his chin towards the face. Earl leaned in, straightened slowly. "Well," he said, "that's rude." He took off his hat and scratched the back of his neck with one gloved thumb, buying time from whichever deity supervises county law enforcement. "You know I gotta call this in." "You'd rather it be walking?" Earl looked toward the trees. They stood black against the bright frost like bad teeth. "I'll make the call," he said, already regretting every number he was about to dial. As he turned away, the corpse made a small wet sound in the back of its wrecked throat. Both men froze. The sheriff half drew his sidearm with the slow, unbelieving motion of a man embarrassed to be frightened and more embarrassed not to be. The throat worked again. Then, from somewhere down inside the torn chest, a voice came out. Not language. Not yet. Just a sound, a low, broken approximation of breath and tone, as if somebody had fed a prayer through a drain pipe and forgotten the words. Earl backed up 3 full steps. Calder fired a 3rd round into the sternum. The body jumped. The sound stopped. Black fluid leaked into the frost in branching lines that did not soak downward so much as travel outward, following the grass as though it preferred surfaces. Earl said, "Okay." He said it the way a doctor says terminal. "Okay, we're out of county equipment for this one." He took out his phone from as far back as he could while still pretending it was standard procedure. That was the first truly intelligent thing anybody did that day besides pulling the trigger. They came in 3 gray trucks with no markings, because government gets shy whenever it has to admit it exists. The vehicles rolled up the ranch road low and heavy, chewing mud into the ruts like armored pigs. Men and women climbed out in parkas and gloves. They moved with the restrained, joyless efficiency of people who have practiced saying classified in hotel bars, funeral parlors, and awkward family kitchens. Their badges flashed little bits of eagle and alphabet. Enough brass to imply authority, not enough to identify where it came from. A short woman with a scar along her jaw approached, hands in her coat pockets, face arranged in the careful neutrality of a person who had seen too much and responded by becoming harder to read than tax law. "You Mr. Wynn?" "I've been that a while." "Agent Larkin, I work for a department you do not want corresponding with you. What you shot this morning is now federal property. Do I get a receipt? If it makes you feel included." They tarp-wrapped the body with the respect normally reserved for unstable explosives and unpopular relatives. 4 of them lifted the stretcher. Their knees bent, their shoulders dipped. "Heavy son of a bitch," one younger man muttered. "It's full of regret," Calder said. "Or Washington." Nobody laughed. Federal people hate free jokes. They cannot file them. Larkin watched the stretcher go into the second truck, then looked back at Calder. "You're coming with us. I've got fences down, a screaming pump, and a herd that thinks the woods are haunted. I'm busy. You're a material witness. You killed it. You saw it first. You're already in the paperwork. From here, the question is whether you ride in the front seat or in restraints." He studied her, then the trucks, then Sheriff Rudd, who had suddenly developed a profound interest in a patch of empty sky. "You gonna water my cattle, Earl?" I'll have Lonnie check on them." Lonnie couldn't find Grace in church with a map. "He's available." That has always been his best quality. They put Calder in the back of the third truck. The doors shut with the soft padded thud of decisions made somewhere else by people with graduate degrees and weak souls. As they pulled away, he looked back through the smeared rear glass. The patch of pasture where the body had lain was empty now except for the black fluid in the frost. And near the tree line, far enough away to deny if it asked, stood a figure, pale, still, watching the trucks leave. It had Calder's posture from a distance, or maybe Earl's. Or maybe that was just fear dressing up the horizon. He leaned toward the glass. The figure raised one arm. Then the road turned, and the trees took it. The facility sat hidden in an old quarry, which felt about right. The government had taken a wound in the earth and filled it with concrete, wire, fluorescent ambition, and enough HVAC infrastructure to refrigerate a medium-sized sin. From the ridge, it looked like nothing. From inside the fence, it looked like the future after a nervous breakdown. Concrete tiers stepped into the blasted bowl of the quarry. Razor wire crowned the fences. Cameras turned in smooth, elegant arcs, pretending not to watch. Antennas and dishes clawed at the sky. The whole place had the clean, sterilized ugliness of a machine designed by people who had never once asked whether a thing ought to exist, only whether funding existed to continue it. At intake, they took his belt, phone, pocket knife, wallet, and any remaining illusion that he was participating voluntarily. A thin young man with the hollow eyes of professional bureaucracy asked whether Calder had surgical hardware, pacemakers, implants, or retained shrapnel. "Just the ordinary lead," Calder said. The kid blinked, checked a box, and moved on. These places function because nobody with a clipboard is permitted enough imagination to be dangerous. They sat him in an interview room with a bolted table, 2 plastic chairs, 1 vent humming overhead, and an observation window looking into a laboratory. Agent Larkin leaned against the wall with a file under one arm. The glass reflected them faintly. Calder did not enjoy that. On the other side, 2 doctors stood beside the covered body. Dr. Harmon Bell was tall, gray, and carried the slow, broad hands of a man who had spent a career cutting into things he could not fix. Dr. Neela Mora was younger, sharp-eyed, exhausted, and holding a recorder like a priest scripting a liturgy she no longer believed would save anyone. Bell looked up through the glass. "You the shooter?" "Seems to be my reputation." "You hit the head." "It felt efficient." Bell gave the smallest grunt. Approval, annoyance, envy, hard to tell. "Let's see what efficiency left us." He pulled the sheet back. Under the lab lights, the creature looked even less dead than a corpse had any right to. The lower jaw was mostly gone. The right eye was ruined. But the rest of the face remained obscenely close to Calder's, like a counterfeit bill left too long in a wet pocket. Mora clicked on the recorder. Specimen H4, humanoid morphology, approximately 1.9 meters in length. No hair, no external genitalia. Facial structure bears strong resemblance to the primary witness, though with visible asymmetries and developmental anomalies. Developmental anomalies, Bell said. That is a polished way to say it failed. Calder stared through the glass. Next time, it won't. Neither doctor answered. The silence did. Bell took up the scalpel. He opened the chest in one long practice stroke. The skin parted too easily. No blood welled. Instead, a clear viscous fluid stretched in shining ropes across the steel and gave off a smell like wet books, old pennies, and the inside of a cheap motel ice machine. Minimal vascular response, Morris said in the recorder. No adipose layer, no apparent subcutaneous. She stopped. Under the skin was a mesh. Fine white fibers crossed and knotted over the deeper body like a root system designed by an engineer. At each junction sat tiny, swollen beads. The whole network flexed faintly under the surgical light. Not enough to call movement if denial was paying your mortgage. Plenty enough if you valued your sleep. Bell touched the lattice with the back of the blade. The fibers lifted slightly before settling. Residual contractility? He said too quickly. That's one name for it. Bell asked for the rib spreader. He cut through the sternum. What should have been bone came apart with a soft, wet complaint. When he opened the cavity, there were no lungs, no heart, no familiar arrangement of human machinery. Only 7 soft chambers, collapsed and empty, like abandoned cocoons. Their inner surfaces held faint impressions. Curves where the ribs should have pressed, channels where some different kind of spine might have lain. As if the body had once held organs or planned to. Looks like it was storing templates, Morris said. Bell leaned in. Or inventory. Deeper in the white mesh lay a cluster of pale bulges, faces. Not complete, not fully formed, but unmistakable. Fruit-sized swells showing the suggestions of brows, lips, noses, eye sockets. Beneath their translucent skin, shadows moved. Calder leaned forward. How many? Bell counted without lifting his eyes. 12, maybe more. Any of them mine? Morris scanned the little almost faces. On one cheek, low and right, she saw the faintest dark fleck under the skin, a mole beginning. Not yet, she said. She lied cleanly, but not well enough. Bell cut deeper into the mesh. The body shuddered. A small motion, quick, denial-sized if you wanted to stay employed. Every filament tightened at once, then relaxed. Several of the half-made faces twitched in unison. Morris stepped back. That was not post-mortem drift. Bell did not answer. Scientists in government custody are just gamblers with grants. He pressed on. He slid a finer blade under the nearest bulge. The skin split like thin fruit rind. Clear gel spilled onto the tray. Suspended in it were white flecks. Teeth, Morris said. Human teeth are close enough to make the difference academic. Too many. Some tiny, some adult-sized, some crooked, one chipped in a horribly specific way. Bell held the blade still. These aren't generic. No, said Mora. They're sourced. From the speaker over the observation glass came Larkin's voice.
Did it vocalize in the field, Mr. Wynn?
Calder kept his eyes on the table. It smiled. I did not wait for the sales pitch. Bell gave a thin, humorless snort. Smartest thing I've heard all week. He reached for a probe. Then the eye opened. Not in the head, That ruin was finished. This one opened under the clavicle, in one of the pale swellings. The surface thinned, split, and a large brown iris rolled wetly into the light. It looked at Mora, then Belle, then the ceiling, then very slowly it turned and fixed itself on the glass. On Calder. He felt that gaze the way a man feels a draft in a sealed room. "What do the monitors say?" Belle asked. "Flat," Mora said. "No pulse, no electrical activity, nothing." The eye blinked. Belle had just enough time to look offended. Then the thing's arm shot up and caught his wrist. The sound of his forearm breaking was not dramatic, just a dry, private snap, like somebody stepping on kindling in the next room. Belle shouted. The scalpel clattered away. Every monitor above the table jumped from flat line to wild static. The mesh inside the chest lit pale and tight, every thread drawing at once. Inside the cavity, all the half-formed faces turned in unison. Tiny mouths moved under their skin. One split open and a tongue slid out to taste the air. Mora dropped the recorder. It shattered on the tile. The corpse sat up, not with the jerking thrash of movie nonsense, with the slow, unstoppable determination of something that had merely waited until everyone present became stupid enough. The chest contracted inward and upward, the white lattice hauling the torso erect. The head rose last, jaw hanging loose. In the back of the throat, where no anatomy textbook in the world could comfort you, a second mouth opened. Not fangs, not wolf teeth, rows and rows of ordinary human teeth, stolen wholesale from the species it was studying. The grip on Belle's wrist tightened. Mora grabbed the bone saw, thumbed it on, and drove it into the creature's forearm. Clear fluid sprayed, white fibers thrashed. The severed hand did not let go. It clung to Belle's arm and began dragging itself upward, fingers walking, the stump writhing with questioning strands that slid beneath his sleeve like pale roots searching for soil. Wherever it passed, his skin blanched.
Cut it off!
Larkin shouted over the speaker. "The door's locked!" Morris shouted back.
Containment sealed!
Belle was gasping now, half from pain, half from the larger horror of watching his professional language fail in real time. The detached hand reached his elbow. Mora raised the saw. "Sorry, Harlan." She took his arm off just below the joint. This time the sound was a screaming metal shriek wrapped around a profoundly human cry. Blood pumped onto the tile. Belle dropped against the wall, white-faced and stunned, the stump hammering red. The severed forearm, still clutched in the creature's dead-looking hand, wriggled loose and tumbled onto the open chest. The hollow chambers opened for it. Not metaphorically. They opened. The soft walls spread and flexed. The arm slid halfway inside. White threads from the thing's cavity knotted themselves around Belle's tendons and muscle. In seconds, the tissue began to fuse. One of the little butted faces shifted, its cheekbone sharpened, its mouth thin. Broken nose took shape. It was becoming Belle. "We're finished," Mora said, and for once, no one accused anyone of exaggeration. The sprinkler system kicked on. Foam. Thick, white, suppressant foam blasting down from the ceiling with a chemical hiss. It coated the lights, the steel table, the floor, the drains, the creature, Belle, Mora, everything. The room vanished by degrees.
Out!
Larkin shouted.
Door should be open now!
The red light above the lab door stayed red. Foam filled Belle's mouth as he tried to speak. At the throat, beneath the stubble, a faint pale seam was already rising under the skin. "If it gets me," he choked. "Burn!" The foam swallowed the rest. Mora disappeared in the white, one arm raised, still holding the saw like a crusader in a detergent commercial from hell. The foam climbed the glass. For one moment, as it spread, there remained a thinning patch no larger than a silver dollar. In that circle, a face pressed forward from the other side, incomplete. No true eyes yet, only hollows, cheekbones, mouth, the shape of a man trying to arrive. On the right cheek, the suggestion of a mole. It looked enough like Calder to disturb old sins. Then the foam sealed over it, and the lab became a white wall. The alarms died one by one. Somewhere deeper in the facility, a heavy fan groaned, slowed, and stopped. The circulating hum went dead. Silence settled in like a new law. Larkin's radio spat static twice and quit. "We're losing power," she said. "Backup grid must route through that lab." "You've got more foam?" She looked at him the way people look at the last surviving optimist after a ship goes down. "You think foam solves this?" "I think men like yours keep giant cans of white panic around for a reason." "I'm not a man." "Fair enough." She pushed off the wall and motioned him toward the door. "Come on, before somebody higher up decides the simplest containment strategy is to include us." They moved through the corridors lit only by red emergency strips. The place smelled of chemicals, hot wiring, and beneath both of those, something older and uglier, the sour, faint odor of shed skin. Patriotic artwork hung on the wall. Mountains, eagles, flags, government issue optimism under glass. The panes reflected them as they passed. Calder kept his eyes away. At the first intersection, they found two security men with carbines drawn and no appetite left for heroism. "What's the order?" one asked. Larkin said, "Seal Sector B, purge the ventilation loop, and if anything with a face asks you a question, do not answer it." That landed harder than shouting would have. The younger guard swallowed. "Anything with a face." "You heard me." They moved on. From somewhere in the ductwork came a metal clink, then another, then three. Calder stopped walking. "You hear that?" Larkin did not stop. "Yes." "That your vent problem?" "It is one of them." "You got more than one." She kept moving. "We always assume more than one." The corridor ahead opened into a security hub with dead monitors and one emergency lamp burning everything blood orange. A technician sat slumped at the desk with his headset askew. Calder thought he was asleep until the man turned. The head turned too far. Not a theatrical spin, just a little too far, with the quiet rolling care of vertebrae obeying instructions from somewhere else. The technician's face looked normal in every detail until you saw it all put together. The skin was too smooth over the cheeks, the mouth too patient, the eyes too unblinking. His badge read Marsh. "Agent Larkin," he said pleasantly, though the voice arrived in two tones half a second apart. "Containment restored." Larkin drew and fired twice into his chest. The body flipped backwards over the chair and vanished behind the console. Calder stepped away from the spray before it hit his boots. "You people shoot first a lot. It saves paperwork." From behind the desk came a moist, scraping sound. A hand appeared over the edge, fingers long and pale now, nails darkening as they grew. Then a second hand. Then a face rose into the view, not as Marsh and not as something finished, but as a quick, ugly negotiation between several possible people at once. It wore Bell's brow for a second, then Mora's mouth, then some third stranger's jaw. Larkin emptied the rest of the magazine into it. The thing fell backwards again. She grabbed a fire axe from the wall and tossed it to Calder. "Now!" That was plain enough. He came over the console and buried the axe in the thing's neck while it still was deciding which man to be. The blade hit the vile resistance of green wood packed with wet rope. Clear fluid and black blood splashed the monitors. The body convulsed and kicked with insect urgency. He struck again, and again. By the fourth blow, the head no longer resembled any living employee of the federal government, which felt like a useful improvement. Larkin reloaded with hands that had done it too many times to count. "This happen often?" "No." "You said that fast." "We rehearse it often." They left the hub and sealed the door behind them with a wheel lock Calder suspected was more ceremonial than useful. The intercom overhead crackled to life. Then, in Larkin's voice, perfectly done, it said,
"Containment restored."
She went pale beneath the fluorescent wash. "That's rude," Calder said. It spoke again now in Calder's own dry weathered tone.
"Containment restored."
Then Bell, then Mora, then the younger guard they had just passed. The voices were not layered. They came one after another, each one better than the last, as if the system itself was auditioning. Larkin drew a sharp breath through her nose. Do not answer. I wasn't planning to join the choir. The intercom hissed softly, and in a voice that sounded like Calder's son at age 15, fresh from the creek and trying to sound grown, it said,
Dad?
Calder stopped so hard his boots squealed. The hallway got narrower. Larkin saw his face and understood enough. Keep moving. The intercom said,
Dad, hold up.
Not a plea, not melodrama, just the exact tone of a boy who believes he still has time. Calder started walking again without comment. That was the only victory available. At the next door, they passed a wall of dark glass that looked into another lab, and in the glass, Calder saw 3 reflections where there should have been 2. He did not turn. That was another victory, smaller, but still human. The 3rd reflection kept pace for 6 steps, then 8. Then it smiled with too many teeth. He still did not turn. Larkin said without looking at him, You saw it. Yes. Do not indulge it. That your departmental term? It is today. They kept walking. From further down the corridor came a voice using Mora's cadence, Bell's baritone, the younger guard's panic, Calder's son, and finally Calder himself, each one saying the same thing with improving confidence. That was the most entertaining part, if you had the wrong kind of soul. A monster running line readings in a federal hallway like a summer stock actor desperate to make opening night. Calder almost laughed. He hated that about himself, but there it was. Terror and amusement sharing a fence line again. Same as always, same as everywhere. At a stairwell landing, they found blood on the rail. Not much, a handprint. 5 streaks dragging downward. Beside it, a row of white flecks laid out with unnatural neatness. 3 teeth. A wedding band. A plastic name badge bent in half. Field samples, Calder thought, though he had not yet coined the phrase. Larkin saw where he was looking and said, Keep moving. That thing likes souvenirs? It likes sequence, she said. Objects help it retain pattern. That's one way to say it. What's your way? It takes notes. She looked at him then, really looked, and something like respect or fatigue or grief crossed her face so quickly it almost passed for light. Yes, she said. That too. They reached the outer gate just as snow began to fall in earnest, a thin, steady curtain coming down over the quarry. Larkin handed him a manila envelope containing a statement already typed, initialed, and spiritually dead. He read it. This says I didn't see anything. It says you did not see anything not already addressed by sealed documentation unavailable to you. That's a spectacularly ornate lie. It's the only kind we mass produce. He signed. That, too, felt American. She took the paper and tucked it away. You think it's dead? She looked towards the road instead of at him. I think we sliced a piece off something larger than the piece. I think we dragged it indoors, numbered it, and argued over which drawer to keep it in. If we're lucky, the suppressant cooked every thread in that lab. If we're unlucky, one strand made it into the vents and is currently learning how fluorescent lights sound at 3 a.m. You're cheerful. I'm a civil servant. Cheerfulness would be misconduct. She hesitated, then pulled back her sleeve enough to show 4 pale marks on her wrist. Finger width. Fresh. It touched me while they were loading it. You burn it off. Maybe. Maybe that's what it wants. Makes us mutilate ourselves before it has to. She lowered the sleeve. If anything comes to your door with your voice on backwards, do not answer. Wasn't planning to entertain. Do not correct it either. That's how people get drawn into conversations they were not built to survive. She handed him his truck keys. Then she stepped back as if nearness itself had become negotiable. On the drive out, he passed one of the security guards kneeling in the snow by the fence, vomiting into the gravel. Nobody stopped to help him. Across the quarry yard, red lights flashed against concrete. Men in respirators wheeled a burn drum toward one of the loading bays. Something inside the drum knocked 3 times. Nobody looked surprised. That was perhaps the worst part of the entire facility. Not that it had horrors in it, that it had procedures for them. The drive home felt longer, and not because the road had changed. The telephone poles slid by like bent crosses. Billboards with smiling women and cheerful families looked like messages from a species already extinct. The snow thickened. The whole sky sagged low and heavy. Pregnant with the sort of weather that makes a man think about every roof that has ever betrayed him. At the ranch, the cattle still stood by the fence, huddled and staring into the timber. They did not turn when he pulled in. Inside, the coffee he had left on the table sat cold and black in the mug, a dead planet in ceramic orbit. The clock over the stove had stopped. He reset it from habit, though after the quarry he no longer believed in time as anything sturdier than a rumor. He walked the house room by room. Windows latched, back door secured. No footprints on the mudroom tile, no broken glass. No sign of intrusion except the feeling that the house had watched something arrive before him and chosen not to interfere. In the kitchen, the mirror over the sink showed him his own face. Lined, tired, weathered into something halfway between a man and a stubborn old workhorse. The scar at the brow, the mole on the right cheek, the deep groove beside the mouth from years of not saying what should have been said while there was still time to matter. He looked hard at his own eyes. They blinked back. "Say something," he told the reflection. It did not. That was still not good enough. He took the mirror down, carried it to the barn, climbed to the loft, and laid it face down in the dust. He did not smash it. There are old superstitions, and there is simply not volunteering for additional problems because you want to feel theatrical. He had already seen what theater looked like under federal funding. Then he walked the rest of the house and removed every reflective thing he could find. Bathroom mirror, hall mirror, the little shaving glass in the bedroom, a framed print near the door with enough glare in it to be untrustworthy. Even the toaster took a hateful look from him before he turned it around on the counter. By dark, the place looked less like a home and more like a witness protection program for furniture. That night, he sat at the kitchen table in the dark with the marlin across his knees. The stove ticked as it cooled. Wind moved along the eaves with a fingernail sound. Every settling noise in the house carried just a little too much intention. At 3:17, the telephone on the wall rang once. The line had been dead for 2 weeks. The pole out by the road leaned like a drunk uncle after payday. He stared at the receiver until the ringing stopped. Outside, something moved along the fence line, heavy enough to notice. Careful enough to be worse. The cattle shifted once, then froze again. Calder stayed where he was. A lesser person might call that courage. It was mostly fatigue, with a little wisdom welded onto it afterward. 3 taps came at the back door, soft, patient, neighborly. He did not move. Then his own voice came through the wood. "Forgot to lock the barn." It was good. Too good for a first attempt. He raised the rifle and aimed at the door but did not fire. Ammunition is a finite resource. Stupidity is not. The voice came again. "Cold as a bastard out here." That was him exactly. The shape of the phrase, the rhythm, even the little contempt in the middle where other men keep humor. He said nothing. The thing outside waited. Then, after a long enough silence to imply learning, it tried again in another voice, his son's. "Dad." He closed his eyes. That was the dangerous word. Not because it was loud, because it was used so casually. No grand haunting, no moan from beyond, just a boy at the wrong hour wanting in from the cold. "Dad, open up." Calder set the rifle on the table, rose, took 3 steps towards the door, then stopped so hard his boots skidded. On the floor by the threshold lay a line of tracked-in mud. Not much, just enough to notice. He had checked that door earlier. The floor had been clean. The tracks led inward. 3 prints, bare feet, damp. Broad at the heel, too narrow at the forefoot. He backed away from the door. The voice outside said softly, almost admiringly, "Good." Then it laughed. Not a monstrous laugh, not a demon's roar, a private, delighted little chuckle in his own voice. The exact sound he might make when a horse finally solved a gate latch or a weather report turned out wrong in his favor. That sent him further backwards than shouting would have. The ceiling vent above the stove clicked. Then something wet moved inside it. He saw no shape, only a slight darkening behind the grill and the minute-shifting pressure of air being disturbed by more than a fan. He picked up the rifle, took the lamp off the table with his left hand, and retreated to the bedroom without haste. Haste is what gets people eaten alive. He shut the door, shoved the dresser in front of it, dragged the bed frame sideways, left the window untouched. That was another lesson from age. Always keep one exit available, even if it leads into weather. He sat on the floor with the muzzle aimed at the vent and the lamp turned low. Above him in the walls, the house began learning how many voices it could hold. First his own, then his son's, then Earl's, badly done, too polite by half. Then Larkin's dry, efficient cadence, which somehow felt dirtier in that house than any whisper from the grave. Then Bell, though Calder had only heard Bell a handful of times. The thing had gotten enough. That was the point. It did not need history. It only needed structure. Then a voice he did not know at all, old and wet and almost amused, speaking not words but scales, testing pitch, testing warmth, teaching itself how close it could get before a body answered on instinct. At some point around dawn, the house felt quiet again. No scratching, no tapping, no son, no self. The kind of silence that does not reassure because it feels less like absence than like a held breath. He waited another hour before moving the dresser. When he finally opened the bedroom door, the house stood unchanged except for one thing. On the kitchen table, beside the dead black cup of coffee, sat a neat little row of objects. A spoon, a church key, his old shaving razor, the cracked lens from a pair of reading glasses, a brass button from one of his son's winter coats, all arranged in a line by size. Field samples. That was what finally made him smile, though there was no joy in it. The son of a bitch was taking notes. He picked up the button first, cold, real, mud at the edge of the thread hole. Then he heard movement behind him and turned the rifle towards the hallway. Nothing there. When he looked back, the shaving razor was gone. He had heard no hand take it, no sleeve brush the table, no footstep. Just absence, quick and well-timed. That was enough. He carried the coffee mug outside and threw it into the stock tank so hard it broke in the ice. Then he went to the barn, got kerosene, and spent the better part of the morning making his house smell like a thread. By the second night, the country road had become a white tunnel between black fences. No one came by, no headlights, no neighbors. Earl called once from town and let it ring 8 times before hanging up. Calder did not answer. He was done trusting wires. He had set lanterns in every room and opened every vent cover he could pry loose. The crawl space hatch stood open. The attic stairs were down. He had turned the place into an invitation for nothing and a trap for anything. He waited in the kitchen with the rifle and a road flare and an old can of diesel. At 11:40, the back doorknob turned. Not rattled, turned. Slowly, carefully, with the respectful patience of something trying not to wake an elderly relative. He aimed at the latch. The knob stopped. Then his own voice from the other side said, almost conversationally, "You always did make things harder than they had to be." That angered him more than it frightened him. The arrogance of it, the theft, the assumption that because it could wear the structure of his voice, it could inherit the history behind it. He walked to the door, stopped 1 pace short, and said through the wood, "You don't know enough to be me." There was a pause outside. Then very softly, very pleasantly, in his son's voice, I'm still learning. Calder fired through the door. The shot blew splinters into the snow beyond. Something wet slapped the porch and skidded. Then came a sound he would hear in dreams until his own death. Not a scream, but a small, surprised laugh. A compliment. The thing dropped off the porch and moved away with appalling speed, feet slapping lightly against the packed snow toward the side of the house. He ran for the window over the tank, hauled the curtain back, and saw it at last in the yard. Not fully one shape. It was changing as it moved, shoulders shifting, back lengthening, face flowing from feature to feature like wax too near a flame. For 1 second it wore Bell, arm stump and all, then Larkin, then the young intake clerk, then Calder's son at 12 in a Broncos coat, then himself again, older, thinner, a little more accurate each time. It stopped by the stock tank, turned, and raised the missing shaving razor in one long pale hand as if returning a borrowed tool. Then it dragged the blade across his own throat. Not to injure, to open. The skin parted from ear to ear along the pale seam he had seen in the field. The lower half of the face came loose and sagged. Underneath was not flesh, but white lattice and more mouths. Dozens of them. Little patient mouths opening and closing in the steam of the yard. He put 3 rounds to the window. Glass exploded inward. The thing folded backwards over the tank and vanished from sight. By the time he got onto the porch with the flare in one hand and diesel in the other, there was only broken ice, black water, and a widening smear across the snow leading towards the pasture. No body, no razor. From the tree line came 3 knocks, then another 3, farther off, then another, as if multiple things out there had begun answering one another in the woods. That was when Calder understood a new and wholly useless truth. The first one had not been alone. Later in reports revised by the kind of men who believe a change in wording can count as victory, there would be debate over whether the Wyoming specimen demonstrated colony behavior, distributed cognition, template inheritance, or merely opportunistic mimicry under stress conditions. This would all sound very impressive in a conference room. It would mean nothing at a ranch house listening to knocks move through the dark like weather. Calder spent the rest of that night on the roof. That was not strategy so much as instinct plus attitude. He climbed up there with blankets, cartridges, the marlin, the road flare, and one lantern turned low. From the peak, he could see the pasture slivered underneath moonlight, the creek cutting black through it, the cattle pressed near the far fence like punctuation marks, in a sentence God had abandoned midway through. Near midnight, shapes moved at the timberline, 3 of them, maybe 4. Too far to describe honestly. Pale where the moon hits them, still where animals ought to twitch. One leaned against a cottonwood in a way he recognized from his own body after a long day's work. Another stood with its head cocked exactly as his boy used to when he'd listened for deer in the dark. They did not come closer. They just watched the house. Observed it in the way a surveyor studies bad land he intends to own later. One of them lifted an arm, another copied, then all of them. In staggered sequence made the same small gesture Calder used every winter morning before stepping into the cold. Rubbing thumb across the first 2 fingers to test the dry bite in the air. Data. Practice. He understood the message and hated that he did. By dawn, they were gone. The cattle would not come near the lower pasture after that. Not for feed, not for salt. You can whip an animal into motion. You cannot persuade it that your lies outrank its nerves. Sheriff Red came by the next afternoon and found Calder sleep-deprived, unshaven, and on the porch reloading cartridges with the grave precision of a priest filling communion cups. "You look like hell," Earl said. "I've looked better." The sheriff eyed the patch door, the broken kitchen window, the missing mirrors, and the kerosene can by the steps. "You want to tell me what happened?" "No." "I can put a deputy out here." "I'd rather keep the deputy." Earl nodded once. He had reached that age where respect often took the form of not requiring a man to say impossible things aloud. As he turned to leave, Calder said, "If somebody knocks after dark, don't answer unless you can see their breath." Earl looked back. That landed. "Calder..." "I'm done explaining. Take the sentence, or don't." The sheriff stood there a moment with his hat in his hand and weather in the mustache. Then he said, You need anything from town? More shells. Earl nodded again, but this time with the stiff, careful air of a man who had just accepted a superstition into the category of procedure. That is how it happened in the country. One sentence at a time, fear becomes folklore. Folklore becomes policy. Policy becomes survival, if you're lucky. Elsewhere, under another hateful ceiling, clean people in nitrile gloves were using phrases like anomalous, mimetic, predation, adaptive morphology, distributed organogenesis, and possible lattice-based cognition. They were printing charts, running tissue comparisons, overlaying Bell's vital collapse against monitor spikes, writing memoranda to other memoranda, explaining each new obscenity in increasingly elegant language until the thing sounded almost manageable. They did not spend much time on the faces under the skin. They said even less about the eye in the chest. And none of them said the simplest thing because simplicity is bad for careers. Calder had no use for their language. He had a herd, a mortgage, a dead son, a rifle older than most of the men at the quarry, and a house that now contained at least one voice more than it had been built for. That was not ignorance. That was a narrower, better education. What he knew now was plain. Whatever lives under the skin of this world is studying us. It comes up through trees, trenches, vents, culverts, storm drains, mine shafts, dry creek beds, and every other place civilization pretends is empty because it cannot afford any other story. It learns shapes, it learns posture, it learns grief, hesitation, vanity, humor, and the exact angle a man tips his head when he hears his own name from the wrong mouth. It learns our little evasions, too. The way a person keeps themselves busy so they do not have to sit alone with what hurts. The way he turns work into ritual because machinery asks less of him than mourning does. The way she lets procedure impersonate understanding. The way whole institutions would rather catalog terror than admit they are frightened. It keeps all of it. Every time somebody shoots one, cuts one, traps one, documents one, labels one, studies one under bright lights with proper forms and optimistic funding, it learns a little faster. The species calls this progress because we are addicted to the sound of our own excuses. Call it practice instead. Weeks later, the snow would melt, though not on that patch of pasture. Spring would attempt its usual fraud. The creek would rise, the cottonwoods would leave, federal trucks would stop coming, the quarry road would go quiet. People in town would tell themselves the ugly season had passed. That is another national pastime, confusing the end of visible activity with the end of danger. Calder knew better. He knew because sometimes at dusk, when the wind came off the ridge just wrong, the vents in his house would speak in half-formed syllables. He knew because one calf was born with a muddy brown fleck in the left eye, exactly where his own had been marked by that childhood stone, and he sold the animal at a loss before it was old enough to learn his name. He knew because once, in the chrome back of a teaspoon he had forgotten to turn over, he saw his reflection smile a half-second after he stopped. And because every now and then, out near the timberline, he would find little arrangements in the grass. A spoon, a button, spent casing, broken comb tooth, 3 pebbles in a row the color of old human teeth, field notes. That was what he called them, though the phrase gave the things more professionalism than they deserved. The truth was simpler and uglier. Something out there was setting for the exam of being us. So if one night there comes a knock at your door, 3 polite taps, and a voice you love says it is cold, and then another voice you love says the same, and then at last your own voice comes through the wood asking you to open up, put the gun down, stop being dramatic, quit making a scene, and remember this. You do not open, you do not answer. You do not get cute, you do not argue, you do not explain that it has the wrong inflection or the wrong childhood memory or the wrong favorite hymn. You do not try to educate the dark. It has a better memory than you do, and all the time in the world to rehearse. Let it stand there and work on your name until dawn. Until boredom, until fire, until judgment, until the Republic finally collapses under the weight of its own paperwork, whichever gets there first. To it, you are data. That part cannot be helped. What can be helped is whether you choose to be useful. Be a bad sample. End field notes.